Charles Grayson's ascent in the political world was nothing short of remarkable. Born into a modest family, he understood the value of hard work and the importance of building connections. From a young age, Grayson was determined to make a name for himself in Washington, D.C. His early years in politics were marked by an unwavering focus on his career and an almost obsessive attention to his public image. He quickly became known as a man who could charm anyone, from fellow politicians to ordinary voters, with his eloquent speeches and genuine-sounding empathy. His success was no accident. He had a clear plan, and he executed it flawlessly. By the time Grayson was elected to the Senate, he had already made a name for himself as a brilliant strategist, a man who understood the power of image just as much as the power of policy. His campaign promises focused on healthcare reform, economic stability, and national security, and he worked tirelessly to position himself as a beacon of hope for the American people. In public, Grayson was always calm, composed, and assured. He had a magnetic presence, and his speeches were often peppered with just enough personal anecdotes to make him seem relatable, despite his polished exterior. Grayson's political achievements were not just limited to his speeches and policies. Behind the scenes, he made smart alliances and leveraged his influence to secure key positions within the Senate. His ability to navigate complex political dynamics earned him respect on both sides of the aisle. The media adored him for his charisma and the way he seemed to embody the ideal of a dedicated public servant. Even his personal life was carefully curated, with a well-maintained marriage and 2 young children, a picture-perfect family that seemed to epitomize the American dream. However, despite his carefully constructed persona, there were whispers of a more complicated side to Grayson. His charm was known to be captivating, but it was also said to be a facade. Colleagues and close aides knew that beneath the polished exterior was a man driven by ambition, whose political success was his primary focus, sometimes to the detriment of those around him. Still, Grayson's public image remained largely untarnished, and his popularity only grew as he made moves toward higher office. It was in the midst of this growing influence that Emily Brooks entered the picture. She was a bright, idealistic intern who had recently graduated from college with dreams of making a difference in the world. When she was assigned to Grayson's office, she saw the opportunity as a stepping stone to her own political aspirations. Initially, she was in awe of the senator, admiring his accomplishments and his reputation. She was eager to learn from him, to be part of something larger than herself. But soon, Emily began to see a different side of Grayson. At first, it was small things, slight gestures of attention, moments when Grayson's charm seemed to cross a line. She was flattered, even entertained by his interest in her, thinking it was part of his mentorship. But as time went on, the boundaries between their professional relationship and something more personal blurred. It became clear that Grayson, while publicly focused on his career, had his own hidden desires. And Emily, vulnerable and caught up in the excitement of working alongside someone so powerful, found herself drawn into a dangerous game. The affair that began as a subtle attraction soon spiraled into something far more complicated and deadly than either of them could have anticipated. The affair between Charles Grayson and Emily Brooks began innocuously enough, starting with small, seemingly innocent interactions. At first, it was nothing more than casual conversations in the senator's office, moments when Grayson would ask Emily for her opinion on certain issues or give her advice on how to navigate the demanding world of politics. Emily, eager to learn, was flattered by his attention. She had grown up watching Grayson on TV, admiring his eloquence and conviction. To her, being in the same room as him felt like an incredible privilege, a dream come true. It wasn't long before those conversations became more personal. Grayson, with his undeniable charisma, began making subtle gestures that suggested a deeper interest. He would compliment Emily on her intellect, commenting on how rare it was to find someone so young and driven. It was these small affirmations that made her feel special, like she had the senator's full attention. He often found reasons to call her into his office, making excuses for her to spend extra time with him. Each encounter seemed to affirm her place in his world, even as she began to feel an unease she couldn't fully understand. What started as innocent admiration gradually shifted into flirtation. Grayson would linger a little longer than necessary during their meetings, his gaze holding a bit too long, his smile a little more suggestive. Emily tried to ignore the subtle shift in his behavior, telling herself that he was just being friendly, that she was reading too much into it. But deep down, she knew that something was happening, something she couldn't control. One evening, after a long day of work, Grayson invited Emily to join him for a drink at a nearby restaurant. She hesitated, unsure if it was appropriate, but Grayson assured her that it was just a casual meeting. They sat at a corner table, their conversation flowing easily as the hours passed. Grayson talked about his career, his family, and his vision for the future. Emily listened intently, feeling both awe and a sense of intimacy she had never experienced before. She couldn't deny the attraction she felt toward him, nor could she ignore the way he made her feel like the most important person in the room. As the evening drew to a close, Grayson leaned in, his hand resting briefly on hers. The contact sent a jolt through her, and she could feel her heart race. For a moment, everything else in the world seemed to fade away. He didn't pull back, and neither did she. It was a silent acknowledgement that something had shifted, that they were no longer just mentor and intern. From that moment forward, their meetings became charged with a new tension. Grayson's attention toward Emily grew more intense, more focused. Their conversations, once about politics and career advice, started to delve into more personal territory. The lines between professional and personal blurred as they exchanged flirtations, and soon, what had been a quiet, unspoken connection blossomed into a full-blown affair. At first, Emily was swept up in the excitement of it all. She felt like she had finally broken through the barriers of her small-town upbringing, finding herself in a world of power, prestige, and luxury. Grayson made her feel like she mattered, like she was seen in a way she had never experienced before. But as the affair continued, so did the weight of the secrecy. Emily began to feel conflicted, torn between the thrill of the relationship and the growing awareness of its consequences. She knew that if anyone discovered what was happening between them, it could ruin Grayson's career and possibly her own future. Grayson, meanwhile, seemed to grow more and more confident in his ability to control the situation. He reassured Emily that everything would be fine, that they could keep their secret hidden. But behind the facade of calm, he began to show signs of paranoia. Grayson was a man who had built his entire career on his public image, and the idea of that image being tarnished by a scandal was something he could not bear to face. He became increasingly possessive of Emily, wanting to make sure that she kept the affair under wraps at all costs. The more he pressured her, the more Emily felt trapped in a web she couldn't escape. What had once felt like a thrilling adventure had slowly turned into a dangerous game, one where the stakes were much higher than she had ever imagined. Despite the mounting tension, neither Grayson nor Emily could walk away. They were both ensnared in the affair, unable to sever the connection they had formed. The deeper they went, the more isolated they became from everyone around them, their private world growing more insular and fraught with the possibility of exposure. As the months went by, the affair between Charles Grayson and Emily Brooks remained a carefully guarded secret. But the strain of keeping such a massive secret began to take its toll. Grayson, despite his carefully maintained public image, started to feel the pressure of the situation closing in on him. He had built his political career on trust and integrity, and the mere possibility of a scandal was enough to unsettle him. He became increasingly paranoid, constantly worried that someone, somewhere, might catch wind of his indiscretions. Grayson had managed to charm the media and the public with his carefully crafted persona, but beneath the surface, a growing sense of fear began to bubble up. Emily, too, started to feel the weight of the affair. While initially excited by the secretive nature of their relationship, she soon began to feel the isolation that came with it. She was trapped in a world where their connection had to be hidden from view, and the constant need for secrecy made her anxious. The longer she remained involved with Grayson, the more she realized just how much she stood to lose if anyone found out. Despite her rising discomfort, she still found herself entangled in the affair, unable to break free from the powerful draw of Grayson's charm. The tension between the two grew as Grayson's paranoia worsened. He started to see threats everywhere. Even the most innocent comments from staff members seemed like potential betrayals. He began limiting his interactions with Emily, trying to distance himself from her as much as possible without outright ending the affair. The more he pulled away, the more Emily became frustrated. She had fallen for him, or at least had convinced herself that she had. She wanted more than just fleeting moments in hidden corners of his office. She wanted to be seen, to be acknowledged publicly as more than just an intern. Meanwhile, whispers began to circulate among Grayson's staff. Some of the more observant colleagues noticed his growing distance from Emily and started to question the nature of their relationship. His reluctance to have her in public meetings, his odd behavior around her, all sparked suspicion. The more time passed, the more the rumors grew. Grayson, ever the politician, did his best to shut down any potential gossip. He relied on his charisma, his ability to charm those around him, to keep things under control. But he couldn't ignore the fact that the rumors were intensifying, and with the media's increasing scrutiny on his every move, he realized that it was only a matter of time before something leaked. Emily, too, began to feel the subtle shift in the atmosphere. At first, she didn't fully understand the tension. She just knew that she was no longer receiving the same level of attention from Grayson that she once had. He had become distant, almost cold at times, though his actions remained more than enough to keep her coming back. But when she overheard a conversation between two of Grayson's aides, she was confronted with the reality of what was happening. It wasn't just a whisper of suspicion anymore. It was a tangible threat. The idea of the affair leaking to the press, the very thought of it becoming public knowledge, terrified her. Emily knew that a scandal could destroy everything Grayson had worked for. His career, his reputation, the perfect family he had built. Everything would come crashing down. Grayson, aware of the growing threat, began to take drastic measures to ensure that nothing would jeopardize his carefully constructed life. He started subtly distancing himself from Emily, making it clear that their relationship was over, or at least that it had to be for the sake of his career. He assured her that it wasn't personal, that he still valued her as an intern, but the risks were simply too high. He even suggested that she leave Washington for a while to avoid the mounting attention. Emily, heartbroken and confused, didn't want to let go of the man she had once trusted. But the pressure of the situation continued to weigh heavily on her, and she found herself caught between her emotions and the fear of the fallout that might come if their affair were exposed. Grayson, on the other hand, seemed more resolute than ever. The idea of losing everything he had worked for was now more terrifying than anything else. He wasn't about to let a young intern and the potential scandal she represented destroy the life he had so carefully built. In the back of his mind, Grayson began to wonder just how far he would go to protect his reputation. The stakes had never been higher, and he was determined to ensure that no one would ruin his perfect image. His public persona was too valuable, and he would do whatever it took to safeguard it, even if that meant making decisions that would lead them both down a dangerous path. The mounting pressure had pushed him to the edge, and he knew that the affair, if exposed, would be the undoing of everything he had worked so hard to achieve. One chilly evening in early April 2019, the tension between Charles Grayson and Emily Brooks reached its breaking point. Grayson had for weeks been trying to distance himself from Emily, urging her to move on and leave Washington for good. But Emily, devastated by his sudden coldness and growing rejection, couldn't understand why he had suddenly pulled away. She had invested so much emotionally in their affair, and now she felt betrayed. She had hoped that their relationship would evolve into something more significant, but Grayson, ever the politician, had only seen it as a dangerous entanglement that threatened his carefully constructed life. The confrontation took place in Grayson's private office late at night. The Senate had adjourned hours earlier, and the building was nearly empty. Emily arrived unannounced, her heart heavy with frustration and confusion. She needed answers. She needed him to explain why he was ending things, but she also needed closure, something she felt Grayson had denied her. When she entered the office, Grayson looked up, startled to see her standing there, eyes red from crying. He immediately tried to calm her, offering a few empty words of reassurance. He told her that he cared about her, but that their affair had to end for both their sakes. He emphasized the risks, the consequences, and how it would destroy his political career if anyone found out. Emily, however, was no longer willing to listen to excuses. She was hurt, and the weight of the secrecy, the lies, and the fear of being cast aside was unbearable. She demanded that Grayson explain why he had treated her as though she was nothing more than a fleeting distraction. Grayson's attempts to pacify her only seemed to make things worse. His voice was calm, but his eyes betrayed his growing anxiety. In that moment, Grayson saw the extent of the threat she represented. She had become the one person who knew everything about his darkest secret. Emily had the power to ruin him. He had always been in control, manipulating the situation to maintain his image, but now, with the weight of Emily's fury and her demand for answers, he felt something he had never felt before. Desperate. The argument escalated, and in the heat of the moment, something inside Grayson snapped. In a fit of rage, his frustration with the situation boiled over. The emotional turmoil he had been suppressing for so long overwhelmed him. Emily's voice grew louder, her accusations more pointed, and in that instant, Grayson lost his composure. His hands gripped the heavy paperweight sitting on his desk, and without thinking, he swung it at her. "We have a lawsuit," Ambrose said. The blow landed with sickening force, knocking Emily to the ground. Grayson stood frozen for a moment, horrified by what he had just done, but the damage was done. Emily lay motionless on the floor, blood pooling around her head. Panic gripped Grayson as he stared down at the lifeless woman who had once been the object of his attention and affection. He quickly checked her pulse but knew deep down that she was gone. His mind raced, calculating the consequences of his actions. The affair, which had started so innocently, had now spiraled into a deadly consequence that threatened to obliterate everything he had worked for. If anyone found out, it would destroy his career, his family, his reputation, and most importantly, his carefully constructed image. Grayson's first instinct was to cover it up, to make sure no one ever knew what had happened in that office. He quickly began cleaning up the scene, wiping away any trace of his involvement, his mind working frantically to come up with a way to make the situation disappear. He moved Emily's body, staging the scene to look like a tragic accident, hoping the police would believe it was the result of a heated argument gone wrong. Emily discarded the paperweight, trying to distance himself from the weapon that had caused the fatal blow. But no matter how hard Grayson tried to bury the truth, something in his gut told him it wouldn't be that easy. Emily's death wasn't something he could simply erase. As he left the office that night, his heart heavy with guilt and fear, he knew that the consequences of his actions were just beginning. The affair had cost him more than he could ever have imagined, and the secret he had fought so hard to protect was now a deadly reality. Grayson was in far deeper than he realized, and no amount of manipulation or damage control could undo the chain of events he had set in motion. The price of his reputation was far steeper than he had ever expected, and Emily's death would become the dark heart of a scandal that would forever alter his life. In the days following Emily's death, Charles Grayson's world began to unravel at an alarming speed. He did everything he could to maintain his composure, working tirelessly to control the narrative and avoid any suspicion. The first step was ensuring that the scene appeared to be an accident, a tragic, unfortunate outcome of a heated exchange. He'd staged it carefully, moved Emily's body, and wiped away any fingerprints from the paperweight. His team, loyal and efficient, worked to clean up any evidence that might tie him directly to the crime. They even went as far as to remove all the security footage from the building that could have captured any incriminating moments. Grayson had learned long ago that power was not just about making the right decisions, it was about controlling perception. As long as the truth remained hidden, he believed he could salvage his career, his reputation, and his future. The investigation, he hoped, would go nowhere. After all, who would suspect a well-respected senator like him of murder? To the public, he would remain the devoted family man and statesman that they had always admired. The police initially seemed to buy into the narrative that the death was the result of a tragic accident. Emily's body had been found alone in his office, and witnesses described her as upset in the hours before the incident. There were no obvious signs of foul play, and with no witnesses to the altercation, the case seemed to stall. The media, who had once adored Grayson, barely made waves, offering only a few brief mentions of the incident, mostly focusing on his grief. Everything was going according to plan, until an anonymous tip changed everything. One morning, the police received a call from a source claiming to have seen Grayson and Emily together in the building just hours before her death. The informant remained unidentified, but their information was enough to reignite the investigation. Grayson had become the prime suspect, and detectives began scrutinizing his movements, interviews, and his relationship with Emily. It wasn't long before they unearthed details of the affair. Rumors that had long circulated among Grayson's staff, but had been kept under wraps for fear of the senator's power. The pieces were falling into place, and the more the police dug, the more the cracks in Grayson's carefully constructed facade became apparent. Grayson's legal team, ever loyal and well-funded, swung into action. They immediately launched a public campaign to discredit the accusations, painting the affair as nothing more than a misunderstanding and suggesting that Emily had been unstable and emotionally volatile. The senator himself gave a carefully crafted statement, expressing his shock and devastation over Emily's death, reiterating that they had a professional relationship and that any rumors of a romantic involvement were false. He made himself appear as the victim, a man caught up in a tragedy he couldn't have foreseen. But despite all his efforts, the truth began to leak out. Investigators found traces of Grayson's fingerprints on the murder weapon. The paperweight and forensic evidence indicated that Emily had been struck with force, far more than a simple altercation could explain. The evidence pointed toward foul play, and soon Grayson was formally arrested and charged with murder. In a stunning twist, a key witness came forward. One of Grayson's own staff members who had witnessed an argument between the senator and Emily just days before the incident. The staff member had been hesitant to speak out at first, but after hearing about the mounting evidence, they could no longer stay silent. Their testimony filled in the gaps of what had happened that night, revealing the true extent of Grayson's desperation to protect his reputation. It became clear that Emily had become a threat, someone whose silence he could no longer control. The public was stunned. Grayson had once been a political giant, a man who seemed untouchable, his future in Washington secure. But now, with the walls closing in, his reputation, once so carefully cultivated, was nothing more than a house of cards, toppled by the very secrets he had tried so desperately to bury. The affair, the murder, the cover-up, it all unraveled before the eyes of the nation. Grayson's arrest sent shockwaves through the political world. The scandal overshadowed everything he had ever accomplished, turning him from a revered senator into a cautionary tale about power, ambition, and the lengths one would go to protect it. Emily's tragic death became the catalyst for his downfall, and as the case went to trial, the truth was laid bare for the world to see. Grayson's carefully constructed image could not withstand the weight of his actions. The man who had once been at the top of the political ladder was now a convicted murderer, serving a life sentence for the crime that had once seemed impossible. His rise and fall had been swift, but the damage was irreparable. Charles Grayson's conviction was swift and final. The trial, which captivated the nation, exposed every detail of his affair with Emily Brooks and the deadly lengths he had gone to protect his reputation. His once sterling image, built over decades of careful maneuvering and political charisma, crumbled in front of the world. The case was a grim reminder of how ambition, when unchecked, could lead to irreversible consequences. While the courtroom proceedings unfolded, the public watched with a mixture of disbelief and anger. Grayson's fall from grace was a spectacle, and it seemed that every facet of his life was under a microscope. His family, once the picture of political perfection, was torn apart by the scandal. His wife, devastated by the betrayal, filed for divorce, unable to reconcile the man she thought she knew with the man now revealed as a murderer. His children, too, would have to grow up in the shadow of a father who had not only destroyed his own life, but theirs as well. Grayson's legal team fought tirelessly to maintain any shred of dignity, trying to salvage his political career, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. The witness testimony, the forensic evidence, and his own erratic behavior all painted a damning picture. He had attempted to manipulate the narrative, to control the situation, but it was clear that his power, once so absolute, could not shield him from the consequences of his actions. In prison, Grayson was no longer the respected senator or the influential politician he had once been. He was just another inmate, left to grapple with the reality of his choices. No longer surrounded by the power and adoration of his political allies, he faced the harshness of a life he could not control. The walls that had once been his shield now closed in on him, and he spent his days reflecting on the decisions that led to his downfall. As for Emily Brooks, her tragic death remained a haunting reminder of how one person's ambition could destroy another's life. She had come to Washington with dreams of making a difference, only to become a pawn in a political game she never intended to play. Her memory, though overshadowed by Grayson's crimes, lived on in the hearts of those who knew her, and in the end it was her story that became the most compelling part of the tale. The story of a young woman caught in the web of power, whose life was taken far too soon.